sure. I have a good amount of time, probably 30 minutes. We can talk.
All right. So, I just wanted to spend some time this morning going over a discussion on your resume. A lot of times when I look at resumes, there's the paper version, but then there's the behind-the-scenes version. So I wanted to kind of get a little bit more detail from you on what your experience was like. Let me start off by saying that I was impressed with your resume, but I did have a few general questions that kind of came up. The one that kind of jumped out at me initially was there is a statement that talks about 8 years of experience in Linux administration, configuration, et cetera, et cetera. Are you strictly a Linux person, or are you also a Windows person? What do you think is your strengths and weaknesses?
Yeah, sure. Thank you guys. Thanks for taking your valuable time first. So I would say I had pretty good experience on both the platforms, Linux as well as a Windows platform. I could say Linux probably, I could say 60% in the current role. I'm working on the Linux AMIs like Red Hat Enterprise Linux and the Century 7 platform. On Windows probably 30 to 40%. So that is the division that I've been working on.
Got it. And what do you think your strengths are in both of those platforms?
Yes, sir. I could have probably 9 out of 10 on both of them. Both the Linux as well as Windows. So I'd say a pretty solid experience on them.
Okay. So when we talk about those particular strengths, we're talking about a very broad environment on both ends. When I look at the Linux, there's a lot of different application installs and configurations that one can apply. Are you saying that you're pretty proficient with most of the types of configurations, which include networking, clustering, application setups, those kind of things?
Yes, that is correct. So in the current project, I was actually working with different AWS tools as well, primarily, Route 53, had pretty good experience on setting up the access control layers, setting up the VPC pairing, particularly related to network route tables, and then configuring them. So, yeah, good experience with them.
Got you. Does your experience extend to physical machines, or are you a virtual person only?
I could say both physical machines as well. So in the current environment, I recently deployed a Kubernetes cluster on the CentOS 7 platform. So I had a good experience on working with the hardware as well, apart from the VMs.
Okay. So let's talk about your AWS experience for 1 second. On AWS, what is the most complex application that you've ever either had to manage?
Sure. So AWS, I was actually working with a Python-based application. So where I was responsible for creating the entire architecture from scratch. So I was using Boto 3 framework to do that, and I had to integrate this application with Amazon Aurora. I think that's one of the pretty good complex environment I worked on, because the client has a pretty large Aurora DB cluster, and then kind of integrating that with the Python-based application with the MySQL and then the cluster volume. So I think that's one of the challenging or the complex project that I've done.
Okay. Within that application itself, why don't you describe the segmentation of certain AWS objects? Where was your compute environment in comparison to your relational database? Can you give me a general overview of how the structure was set up?
Sure. So particularly, that's zero downtime on high availability cluster. So we had spotless instances that we are using on the EC2 primarily. And then storage-wise, we have been using particularly S3. And then all of the DB instances, particularly related to Aurora DB, they are running on the Amazon RDS primarily. which is like supporting the standard SQL client application. And each of the snapshot of the DB cluster, I've been actually doing a cloning and replication on the RDS. And for networking, Route 53, S3 for logging. And I also actually deployed some heavy forwarders using Splunk on the database as well as an application to provide central logging. So that is the architecture that I've been working with.
Got it. Okay. So you said zero downtime. How are you managing zero downtime within that application?
Yeah, sure. So zero downtime deployment wise, what we have been particularly doing is that, so we are following some of the best practices, particularly via blue-green deployments. So I've actually done blue-green deployment with AWS Elastic Beanstalk. So like updating the application versions, and then if it is unavailable for a short period of time, like, trying to avoid this downtime by performing deployment of a new version to a separate environment, and then kind of swapping the C names of the two environments to particularly redirect it. So that's how I was actually deploying the zero downtime environment right now.
Okay, why not use auto-scaling?
Yeah, sure. So I have actually set up the auto-scaling policies as well. So I had a pretty good experience on setting up different policies of particularly dynamic scaling, which is if there is any action that is performed via Amazon SQS. So I had scaling based on metrics. Like whenever a change in the metric is there, we trigger a CloudWatch alarm, and then the alarm performs this action. And then after the auto scaling policy receives that message, then it will actually activate until delete or either set up the policies. So I've set up something like exact capacity, percent change in capacity, those policies related to auto scaling.
Okay. So when creating your particular servers within your AMI, is there applications that had to be installed and created within the AMI, or are we dynamically installing applications on the fly?
So actually, in the current project role, we had dynamically installing the applications in the AMIs, in the Linux AMIs, on the AWS environment. And deploying these applications, I was actually using AWS CloudFormation, creating custom templates for that as well by AWS OpsWorks. So that is the element of it.
Okay. So it sounds like you're dynamically installing the application from the CloudFormation template itself. Were you involved in creating the CloudFormation template?
Yeah, sure. So I was actually involved with creating the CloudFormation templates from scratch as well. One of the things I was using the AWS CloudFormation Designer, to actually create a stack on the AWS CloudFormation template, and I was using a library called Troposphere to template the existing infrastructure to create them. So I was using the Python library Troposphere.
Okay. What is the number one element in your CloudFormation that describes AWS what you want to do?
Yeah, sure. So one of the main syntax is that you have something called as a template reference. So you have the resource types. You would particularly define how you are going to do a set of functions. So you have a resource attribute reference that you can actually do, and then you have a creation policy attribute. That is what it will actually tell, in the CloudFormation, how you set up the policy, how you are going to spin up an instance, or maybe in the JSON format or an YAML file. You can use that.
Got it. Okay. All right. When it comes to your load balancing environment, what if I wanted to turn around and change, some of my ciphers in order to have a better security for my application? What are the areas that I could go and make changes to?
Yeah, sure. So one of the main things, primarily, one thing we can do is predefined SSL security. So I was using SSL negotiation configuration primarily to do that. And some of the things are particularly related to CloudFront that I was using. I was setting up the viewer protocol policy, which is the minimum SSL protocol version. And then also doing something for the cipher, particularly something called as origin protocol policy. So some of the supported ciphers were like, RSA, AES 256 SHA-384, and then AES 128 SHA. So those are like some OpenSSL cipher names that we are actually supporting on the cloud front end.
Okay. All right. That describes what you're using, but the question really is where you apply the changes to in terms of an AWS object.
Oh, like a AWS object where I would set up the securities, something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, sure. So, you can actually protect that using server-side encryption with the Amazon S3. So, on the object, what you can primarily do is you can have an S3 managed encryption key, and then this Amazon S3 encrypts each object with a particular key. So, you can have a 256 to encrypt the data with a strong block cipher. So, you can say S3 put object and then say MS server-side encryption header. That's how we'll particularly do on the object side.
Okay, on the AWS encryption header, are we talking about, say, on a compute system itself, or are we talking about on the load balancers?
Yeah, it's on the compute because you can have the S3 server-side encryption, so it's on the back end, on the compute S3 object.
Got it. Under what conditions would I use an Nginx solution?
Yeah, Nginx I would generally use as a reverse proxy. So one of the use cases was that I was setting up the Nginx and then kind of using it if I wanted to do as a load balancing and if I wanted to routing and then configure it. So kind of a micro instances, you can use Nginx as a reverse proxy server to reroute the TCP or UDP connections and then kind of improve the performance, high performance load balancer.
Got it. Okay. Under what condition would I not use a internet gateway?
Internet gateway, sure. So one particular, I could say scenario where you don't want to use internet gateway is say you have a NAT gateway as an internet gateway, and if you're setting up a VPC environment and then you wanted to create and attach it only to a private cloud. So at that point of the time, there is no point of using an internet gateway where you have highly available VPC pairing that's already available. So that's where you can actually not have internet gateway as well.
Okay. So why can't I use, say, a NAT gateway? What's the limitations on a NAT gateway?
Yeah, sure. So one of the limitations is that if you're using the NAT gateway and then you're particularly doing say associating exactly one elastic IP addresses, because you cannot associate more than couple of more than one elastic IP addresses, and also you cannot associate a security group with a NAT gateway. That's also what's one of the limitation primarily. And it only just bursts up to 10 gigs of bandwidth. So if you're particularly more than that, limitation wise, so that's also another limitation.
Okay, understood. In a serverless design itself, what kind of implementation would you suggest if I want to turn around and implement a solution, but I don't want to manage the compute environment?
Can you repeat that one? It's lost it. So you wanted to have a serverless compute environment?
Yes, I want to have a serverless environment.
Yeah, sure. So for the serverless architecture, I was particularly using AWS Lambda. So to kind of set up a multi-tier architecture, serverless one. So I was having good experience on using AWS Lambda for that, running the code without the servers and then only kind of using it as a backend to automatically trigger from any of the AWS services to call it directly. So yeah.
Okay. Have you written any Lambda functions at all? I'm just curious.
Yeah, sure. So Lambda functions, I had good experience. I had good experience writing in Python using both of the framework. So I had a good experience experience with like lambdas, and in the current project I have created custom lambda functions to trigger CloudWatch alarms as well.
There's a timeout period where Lambda only listens for a certain period of time in terms of the transaction. You happen to know what that value is?
The timeout period, the default timeout is like 3 seconds.
Okay. What if the transaction lasts, longer than 3 seconds? What's the impact?
Yeah, I mean, it will generally not process that, and then you can actually, maybe set up a default value, but you can set up the timeout anywhere from 1 and 300 seconds. And if it is more than say 3 seconds, and then it's less than that, it'll actually design the complete resources, and then it can't execute. So an event source will not be affected.
Is there any way around that limitation?
Yeah, that limitation you can actually change it down. Maybe if you're changing of the event function or the event attribute in the lambda, so that way you can actually change that.
Okay. Let's go on a little further. You talked about CloudFormation as a template. How are you using your Chef, Puppet, or Ansible solutions?
Yeah, so Chef I was particularly using for configuration management, particularly. So I've been particularly working with, I'm doing configuration or creating recipes as well as custom cookbooks, primarily, and also in the current project role I was using Ansible as well for one of the projects, defining those agents, and then using the Ginger template for the configuration management. Those are the things I've done. And we follow test-driven development, so I was using Test Kitchen as well as RSpec to test those checklist pieces.
Are you able to use those same scripts for on-premise infrastructure?
Yes, that is correct. Yeah, same scripts for on-premise as well.
Okay. What's the environment look like on-premise?
Yeah, so on-prem environment currently I am actually running well, that has those Linux primarily. So that is the environment, and I was using the Red Hat Cyclone as well as Package Manager on the on-prem environment, and then we also host CentOS 7. So we don't using CentOS 7 to run the Kubernetes cluster.
Okay. That's fine. Can you turn around and do the same level of automation to Windows?
Yeah, so Windows particularly work with SQL Server as well as Azure as well. So I have experience on doing or automating the subscriptions to get the logs into the application insights on Azure on the Windows. So very expensive to do.
Okay. I noticed that you said that you had some VMware experience. What version of VMware were you using?
Yeah, I was using the VMware ESXi client. So that is the one that I've used.
Okay. And how many clients how many hosts on an average were you managing?
Yeah, 300 right now. So I was using
300 hosts?
Yeah.
Okay. And how many guests per host?
Give me a minute.
So we have close to maybe 50 guests for each host.
50 guests for each host?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. So what's the CPU and memory allocation of each one of the guests?
Yeah, so the CPU parameter is, I would say, close to 1 core for each guest user, and then the other one, the terabyte was, it's close to 10 terabyte for each of the configurations. So it is around.
Okay. What type of servers are these? Application servers, relational database servers?
Mm-hmm. So we have a mix of them primarily. So some of them are application servers like JBoss, Then we have like I could say WebSphere as well, some of them, and then other ones like Cassandra. Some of them are like that.
Cincinnati, Ohio.
Okay. But only running 1 gig or one processor?
Yes, I mean like it's actually a multi-cluster node, so they actually spin out like more than at a time like 5 as well. Depends upon like what process they're running. Like say for the Cassandra, if they're doing a lot of block queries, it actually automatically spins up close to 4 to 6 cores as well. So.
Okay, that sounds like the do. But anyway, all right. In your VM experience itself, looking at Ansible or looking at automated methods, how are you guys handling patch updates?
Yeah, patch updates. I've been particularly working with RL. So I was then using that as an on-prem environment. So I was using patching, like security patches, update patches. So I was using that one. So.
I'm sorry, I missed. What were you using?
Like RHEL package manager, like to actually apply the security packages, like patches, like for the patch.
Okay, and how frequently were you running that?
So it actually depends like what updates that are available, and it's usually say every week we write once, like if there's any security patch that's not updated. So we are actually doing a POC with a thing called AutoMox, which is a cloud-based patch management solution, AutoMox. So I think probably we're going to production maybe a couple of weeks, I think, with that tool, AutoMox.
I see. Okay. And were your servers themselves? You said how much storage on an average was within your guest server?
Yeah, storage-wise, it's primarily managed like it's a dynamic cluster size that we link into the S3. So there's like not any particular size, so it just depends on how much data we're loading. And typically, it's I could say like close to 10 terabytes. It actually loads, and then dynamically scales upon more than the data consumes.
Okay, so you're using an S3 bucket as your storage for an on-premise environment?
Yes. No, not from an on-premise environment. For the cloud, like for the on-prem, I could say like maybe 5 terabytes for the database servers and then application servers.
Okay, so on your on-premise environment, how are you dealing with storage?
Yeah, so on-prem storage we have like particularly something called as on the platform itself. Like we have been using a custom upgrader to actually manage the storage-wise. Of course, like maybe a database storage, like databases like MongoDB, Cassandra, MySQL. That is the thing we've been doing.
Okay. What format is the file that's being stored in MongoDB or in your relational database?
Yes. Both of it's actually a document directly structured. So it's in the form of like text files if you're having or like something called a flat file actually. So that is the file type that we're actually storing there. Which is nothing but the decent file. That is the format actually.
Okay. Let's talk about. Let's find out. Of your knowledge, are you more of a networking person, storage person, virtualization person, or security person? What do you think your strengths are?
Yeah, so I could say more of like networking as well as security.
Okay. So on the security side, give me an overview of what you have done.
Yeah, for security, like I've used the AWS KMS key management service as well as like the AWS KMS for encryption primarily. And also one of the best practices that you're doing is like SSH is like, kind of using Kerberos as well primarily. So I had good experience on setting up the Kerberos for authentication. And then also using the AD Active Directories to kind of like log in. Using the Kerberos login, I've integrated that. So those are the security things as well.
So you have SAML experience?
Yes, I have some experience on Salesforce as a single sign-on provider. So, yeah, good experience with that.
Define single sign-on for me in how you guys use it.
Yeah, so actually I have one hard stop right now. So, just that is the manager is being, so that will be great.
So I guess what I'm asking is your single sign-on tokenized, or is your single sign-on browser-based?
Yeah, it's a tokenized. It's tokenized.
Okay. How do you share the token between various server entities?
Yeah, so primarily I was using the matching ID to primarily share the token for the SAML. So that is how I'm currently doing it right now. Moving the sites between SAML. And actually I have a hard stop right now. Like I have a hard stop because like it's already 30 minutes. So the manager is picking.
Okay, my apologies. All right. Well, thank you very much. I apologize for going over.
Yeah, no worries. Thank you. Thank you very much.
All right.
Yeah. Bye. Bye-bye. Bye. Thank you guys. Have a great day.
ఇంకో రౌండ్ ఉంటుంది ఇప్పుడే చెప్పు ఫీడ్బ్యాక్
ఇంకో రౌండ్ ఉందా
వెళ్ళాల్సి
మళ్ళీ